Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, although I prefer to call them Zoom chats. But I think one of the things that we learned that Pulsar looking at audience data and topic data is that webinar is here to stay. Like, people like to use webinar. And so it's one of those trends that is going to stay. Good morning if you're tuning in from the Americas. Good afternoon if you're in the time zone where I'm in, which is Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Good evening if you're tuning in from Asia or South Pacific. My name is Davide Beretta. Head up the marketing team here at Pulsar. But I'm not alone today. As you can see, I'm joined by two wonderful guests. We have Jessica Marati Radparvar, who is the founder of Reconsidered, a beautiful online community and consultancy that helps folks in the sustainability and impact space. Hello, Jessica. It's so good to have you here.
Hi, so good to be here.
And we also have tuning in from London, our headquarters for Pulsar, Oryelle Clements. She's the research manager at Pulsar, one of the stars of our research team. Hello, Oryelle. Thanks so much for joining.
Hi, lovely to be here.
Hey. So today we're here to talk about sustainability. What a huge topic. It's complex, multifaceted, fast evolving topic. It's also subject to co-optation and different warping of that meaning. So today we'll try to circle around it using a lot of the data sources that Pulsar uses from news and social and search data and audience data. But we're really going to circle around the topic and try to understand what it means and what it can mean for the future in an indirect way, kind of looking at it from different angles. And one of the angles that I think might be useful for all of us is just a little poll that I'm going to launch right now. So hopefully you're going to see it pop up at the bottom of your screen. Simple poll that asks you how you think about sustainability in your work and in your job, what kind of priorities you give. So we'll look at these results in a bit. But I also wanted to start with another, a more human-centric approach of talking about sustainability and maybe asking Jessica and Oryelle to tell us a little bit more about how they think about sustainability in their work, in their personal life, and in general about this evolving concept. Maybe we should start with you, Jessica, since you can give us the perspective of folks who have been thinking about sustainability long before we at Pulsar started.
I'm happy to share, and thank you so much for the invitation. So exciting to be able to have a conversation about this stuff that's truly data driven. So really using kind of the expertise that Pulsar brings, and being able to have a really informed conversation about this is important. As David mentioned, I am the founder and lead impact strategist at Reconsidered. We are a consultancy and community that's focused on corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and social impact. And actually, the fact that I use three words to describe what's essentially the same thing kind of shows some of the challenges that I have with the word sustainability. Because even though it's one of the words that's most associated with the idea of environmental and social progress, it means so many things to so many people that it's pretty much lost its meaning. So, when I think about what sustainability means to me, it's certainly this idea, and I dug a bit into the etymology of the word. It comes from the word meaning to endure in French and Latin. But endure, there's not a lot of energy with the word endure. And certainly part of what we're trying to achieve with sustainability, or for those of us working in the space, is that humanity will be able to endure, the planet will be able to endure. But I like to think of it a bit more as thriving. I think about not just being able to subsist as a species, but to really be able to thrive and be able to create systems where people and animals and plants and all of what constitutes planet Earth is able to thrive in a system that's truly regenerative. So That's one definition. I'm super eager to dig into how other people view it as well.
That's such a great place to start. Thank you, Jessica. Oryelle, you've been working on a lot of really interesting sustainability briefs also in your work at Pulsar. What's your quick take on sustainability before we dive into the 40 plus slides we have ready for folks?
Well, I wish my answer was as succinct and well thought out as Jessica's is. Yes, I work with numerous clients, particularly across the fashion and retail space, all of whom have made sustainability a sort of primary concern, particularly going into the upcoming years and building recommendations and strategies for their campaigns. And the thing that keeps coming back again and again is this idea of authenticity within sustainability. People no longer want the green recycle label just slapped on a bottle and then they move on with their day. They want to understand that a company, that a corporation is building sustainable efforts into so many different facets of its organization, whether that's supporting the people who work there, whether that's to do with the materials used to create the product or the disposal of the product or services. As for me and my personal relationship with sustainability, I felt like I am forever learning about it and forever being educated with the ever-evolving conversation, which hopefully we'll delve into a little bit today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Oryelle. Those are fantastic places to start. I hope everybody can see my screen here. I'm going to build on some of what was already mentioned. So many questions were raised already. But I think the first thing that I want to say is, what about Pulsar? Why is Pulsar a good tool to understand what sustainability might be? We are an audience intelligence company. We call ourselves that because we help folks, different kind of organizations around the world, whether it's companies, brands, understand their audience and make sure that they can create messages that are going to resonate with them. Again, we work with all types of organizations, so many different verticals, and helping them try and understand and connect with their audience in smart ways. The data that you will see comes from several different sources, data sources, but also from several different tools. This is our product suite. We have Trends, which is something that helps you. Google Trends for social media. We have Track, which is our very important flagship social listening and audience intelligence tool, which allows you to listen to any public topic of conversation and segment the audience. So we're going to see some of this within this. And then there's Core, which we didn't use in this analysis. Besides that, we have an insights and strategy team, of which Oryelle is a core part of, that helps clients with larger briefs. And so we try to bring all of this knowledge and understanding of those data sources and of the behaviors that they're expressed within these conversations to try and analyze different topics. Today's program for today will be in 4 parts. The first part, we're going to look at sustainability at a historical level. We're going to look at historical trends starting in 2008, and we're going to look back a little bit at the shifting meaning of sustainability, or the perceived shift in meaning. Secondly, we are going to look at the current conversation. Here, we pulled data from all sorts of data sources like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, Reddit, news, blogs, forums. We listen to that public conversation and try to apply all sorts of lenses to try and analyze that conversation. This was 5.5 million posts and counting for the second half of 2021. Then we are going to zoom in a little bit on the individuals and the audiences of sustainability, specifically focusing on some of the motivators and some of the behaviors that are expressed from individual gravitating towards the concept of sustainability in this form of talking about it in this case. And then we're going to look at some of the industries and brands. I'm going to start with this very simple chart. This is looking at social and search data. The two are two data sources that we use all the time as very complementary. They kind of tell us two sides of the same coin very often. You look at social, it's much more overt, sometimes related to signaling behavior. Search sometimes is more active, is more geared towards an action. It's more intimate experience. You're searching for something. And these are search volume for Google, in this case, like social from Twitter. And we can see that sustainability is the definition of up and to the right. Here, we're just looking from 2013 onwards, but clearly audience interest, both of the search kind and of the social, let's talk about it kind, is growing and growing and growing. And what we can see is also that there's different components to this. So here we mostly looked at sustainable and sustainability. We just focused on those two keywords and hashtags like throughout, but we do see a split between the two. So for instance, sustainable is a little bit larger as volume here on social than sustainability is. Sustainable, of course, has a component that is a little bit more descriptive. Kind of back to Jessica's point about describing something that is kind of renewable and able to continue in the future. It also is something that clearly we use to describe products, experiences, services. So there's a big part of that conversation that is related to describing some of these services, where sustainability is a more broader topic that looks at it a little bit more holistically. What we zooming in a little bit, this looks like a similar chart, but it's actually like a different one. Here we're just zooming in on the meaning, on conversations that are related to the meaning of sustainability. We see that it's growing. It's growing very, very much on search. It's growing very, very much on social. On social, we see those two big spikes, which allow us to single out two different moments in which like the conversation around meaning and sustainability came up. So this first one is a post that talks about individual responsibility and about how that might be a little bit of a something that some systemic forces decide to hide the real state of the planet behind. This post created considerable interest, and of course, like is revolving around the word meaning. There, green capitalism is meant to deceive us, not save us. Whereas this other one that was from Twitter, of course, and this other one also from Twitter is interesting because it's a brand partnership. So here we have BTS, who you're all familiar with, undoubtedly, the #1 band on the planet by any measure for a long time now, and they partnered with Hyundai to talk about World Water Day. This had a component of meaning as well. What does water mean to you? This was a brand-driven conversation that spiked a lot of interest in meaning of sustainability. Jessica, I believe you had a couple comments on this one when we were talking before. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it it reinforced some of the learnings that we've gathered. A couple of years ago, Reconsidered put out a playbook on how behavioral science can help sustainability and CSR practitioners be more effective in their communications and embedding. And some of the insights from that research were that there are some levers that are incredibly powerful when it comes to engaging and convincing and persuading people to care about sustainability. And one is experiencing or seeing the effects of climate change for themselves. And I think this example of, the San Francisco skyline lit up in orange because of the wildfires, which have now become an annual thing, is one prime example. And then second is, having people that you admire, tastemakers, influencers, people whom you admire and respect stand for a cause is another huge lever. And so BTS, in this post, it was BTS and Hyundai partnering up to promote clean energy around the launch of the new electric vehicle. And BTS, with their reach in Asia and beyond, the fact that that partnership could lead to a spike this tremendous just shows the incredible power of partnering with celebrities and influencers and really kind of engaging them in this work. So really kind of struck by this slide and that how it reinforced some of those some of those behavior change insights.
Thank you, Jessica. By the way, I see some folks raising their hands. I'm aware I'm presenting full screen, so I can't quite see what's in there. If you have any questions, I would love for you to put them in the Q&A box. It's at the bottom of your screen, and we can pick them up later and try to address them best we can. Sorry about that, but I can only present with one screen. What we've seen like throughout these first few slides is that audiences are clearly very interested, but there's also some confusion. I think the confusion comes from the how general sustainability word and concepts are, but also by the fact that it's being used so differently by different audiences. We at Pulsar, we always say different people talk about the same topic differently. It's a deceivingly simple little phrase that I think captures the nature of the medium that we're in. We're not in a mass medium where one message is directed to many and is kind of controlled. We're in a network medium. And so different communities spring up and kind of latch onto some of these topics in ways that are very, very different from others. And because I think it's such an essential, sustainability as a concept is such an essential idea for our time, I think that brings us to what, again, Jessica, you've known for so long. There is what you described as a vocabulary problem around sustainability, specifically for professionals who've been looking at this for decades, right?
Yeah. And the risk there is, if people don't have clarity around the meaning of a word, and if it doesn't resonate and connect, after enough repetition, it just becomes white noise. And so the words we use really matter. And so understanding not just, being clear with ourselves what we mean when we use these words, but also understanding the wide array of interpretations that people might have of this word will ultimately help us be more effective in driving the type of change that we want to see. So I think it's important. It's a really important conversation and point for us to keep on reflecting on as practitioners.
Especially because like the meaning of words is really not static, right? It comes back to what we were discussing before. Like it's dictionaries try to capture the meaning of words in ways maybe they update it once a year, but really living in this network culture, like words or even emojis, right? Like change meaning like so fast that it's really important to understand like where these changes are coming from and where they're going.
Yeah, so, you put it so well in the pre-conversation we were having that it's dictionary definitions are a lagging indicator. And so, keeping up to date with kind of the zeitgeist, if you will, around a term is really important.
Especially because sustainability is something that we're learning how to do. I feel like maybe relearning. It's going to change as we become more aware of what is actually sustainable, what is not, what is maybe some other word, which we'll address in a second. This chart here is our attempt to look at things, again, from a historical perspective, even a slightly broader lens here. We're looking from 2008, January to now, really. And what we did here is we took like all mentions of sustainable and sustainability, and we divided it up into different dimensions according to these four buckets that we defined around other keywords that were being used. So the first one being society, so social concerns, ecology, purely environmental and ecological concerns, product and business. They're both in blue because they're kind of related to one another. Business is more like the corporate initiatives or the corporate perception or anything that relates to the stock market and to how a company might want to present whatever they do as sustainable, and the products more specifically to sometimes the outputs of those business activities, which are products that are sold on the market and described again as potentially sustainable or not sustainable. So if you look at this chart for a second, you'll see that the main storyline is that simply society and ecology have been like really gaining so much share of voice in this conversation. By the way, this is a conversation that's growing overall. So every single one of these buckets has been growing like quite a bit. But in this visualization, what we're trying to show is the relative weight of each one of these buckets. And we do see that society, for instance, is the one that grows the fastest, even though it is the smallest, and ecology also grows grows quite a bit. You see it starts around here. I think this is probably like around 70 to 73%, and it goes all the way to 50%, the combination of ecology and society. And what we noticed is actually that these start to blend a little bit as we start to think about I think maybe in terms of systems thinking, where we see like a lot of these problems as interconnected, some of the social problems with some of the ecological problems that we have. What we tried to do next is try to map some of these valleys and spikes that you see for the different dimensions to different moments. And so here you start to see a few of those. We have the Greenpeace protest over here. This was back in 2011. Some of you might remember, I sadly do. Greenpeace was blaming Barbie for deforestation. This was a very high profile protest that kind of shifted a little bit the conversation around sustainability. As you can see here, the green section grows. That's a spike of the ecological conversation. Then you might see something like Sustainable Development Goals, which is clearly like an initiative that incorporating sustainable in its name really helped shift this conversation and started building those societal dimensions into our concerns about sustainability, which previously I think were a little bit more focused on the ecological. Then we have, of course, Tesla, which has a huge audience and a huge fandom around it. Some of them stock owners, some of them Tesla owners, some of them just people who are very interested in the technology or in Elon Musk. This was a tweet by Tesla in a conversation on social that really kind of tried to shift and succeeded, at least in the moment, to shift them the perception of Tesla as somebody who's doing something for the environment. You can see here there's a huge spike in green, and that's where like business kind of crosses over into ecology. And then we have other, of course, very important moments. This is it's a movement more than a moment, and it extends over time. But Greta Thunberg's school strike is one that really affected this conversation in terms of like putting the emphasis on ecology, putting the emphasis on society. And finally, a more recent one. This is fairly tragic news about an indigenous environmental activist who is being targeted. And here there's a whole narrative around, with this tweet, there's a whole narrative around how we talk about sustainability that is tied into this. And this was one of the bigger spikes that we saw over the past years around this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and move away a little bit from the historical perspective and start to look at the conversation that we pulled over the past 5-6 months, starting in July. And here, this is a slide that is trying to just look at what's in this huge, gigantic, sometimes confusing sustainability conversation, and how big are topics related to one another. We see that there's different topics that we kind of expect to see here. There are different sizes. The size, of course, of the bubble represents the number of mentions. So we see, for instance, recycling is a huge topic. In this case, having looked into it, it's a particularly negative and skeptical conversation. But for instance, new technologies like crypto, for instance, are starting to catch up. There's a whole language in crypto that is designed to attract folks who are interested in sustainability matters. Society levers like taxes in order to incentivize sustainable behaviors are talked about a lot. The United Nations is a very big presence in this, partly because of sustainable development goals. And here it's interesting, we see people usually like index pretty high in conversations, but these are two of the biggest personalities we could find in this conversation, and they actually have relatively little weight in terms of the sustainability conversation, maybe not in influence, but in terms of like direct mentions. Of course, some other topics in here like flying in airlines and biodiversity, China. This was just to try to approach it from a holistic perspective and try to understand what's in it. Here's another lens that we applied. This is looking at whether the conversation around sustainability seemed to be solution-oriented or whether it seemed to be problem-oriented. And we found, somewhat surprisingly, I think, that it's still a very optimistic conversation, at least from this point of view. We have so many people like talking about it in terms of solutions. We pulled one particularly interesting example. This is one post on Pinterest coming from Glamour, but looking at glitter. Glitter is not necessarily thought of as a very eco-friendly product, but here, best biodegradable glitter for festival goers who want to save the planet. Emphasizing the solution in this case to consumption decisions that folks are making. Whereas on the problem-oriented, we see a lot of conversation that is around trying to zoom in and find the culprit or the problem of sustainability. We also looked at this again from a distance in terms of like who are the actors who are talked about in terms of sustainability. And in this case, like it's almost like who do we perceive to have any agency with regards to sustainability? And we were quite surprised to see corporation come out on top. That's partly because corporations talk a lot about sustainability, especially over the past few years. But it's definitely something that's in the public mind that corporations are a very, very important actor, more so, at least in terms of association of words, than governments or something like activists and nonprofits, which, you know, definitely like have a smaller part of the pie or the donut in this case, we would think. Here's an example of folks talking about corporations, again, a critical take, profitability of corporations over the basic needs of people, and another one that is looking at government and looking at, again, who has agency. It's critical, but it's still assuming agency from part of one of these actors. Then we come to this slide here, which is we tried to look at which other concepts are close or complementary. Definitely, I don't think we have proper synonyms here of sustainability, but because sustainability for some people is emerging and is starting to become maybe a slightly problematic word, a slightly co-opted word, overused, maybe it's leaking in meaning a little bit, and it's kind of like starting to mean less and less. We started to look at other words that might signal something that is related to sustainability. And here we see like eco, green, carbon, anything related to carbon here, in this case, carbon neutral. Carbon offset, circular, recyclable, ecological, and it's very interesting to see how those index against one another. Another thing that we looked at here is how those concepts index in terms of greenwashing. I'll explain the slide in a second because maybe it's not super obvious, but this coral color here is looking at those topics here. Out of these topics here in the sustainability conversations, what's the makeup, right? So green is 20% of those complementary concepts. Whereas in terms of the greenwashing conversation, if we put a greenwashing lens, so we add a greenwashing filter and we look at people who are just looking at greenwashing and sustainability, then we start to see that green is a term that is, of course, like used quite a bit more than some of these others. Eco, for instance, under indexes in terms of greenwashing compared to the overall sustainability conversation. And there's others here, for instance, like ethical, organic, and circular, which are perceived or associated, at least in the public's mind, as less associated with greenwashing, so maybe a little bit less problematic, a little less co-opted possibly. I'm not sure. We need to dig in a little bit deeper into this one. Here's one example of such a conversation that we pulled from Twitter.
Yeah, can I jump in here,
of course,
Davida, because you know, I thought this was a really kind of interesting set of slides. You know, what it kind of said to me was that, you know, in the sustainability communications and sustainability marketing conversation, we are very focused on being very precise and very evolved in our language and thinking about, you know, okay, so if we're not using the word sustainability, then, you know, right, could we use circular? Could we use regenerative? You know, there are a lot of kind of buzzwords that are emerging that feel a little bit more accurate, but also, you know, other companies or organizations might have terms that they really resonate with. I was working with Eileen Fisher for a while, and they referred to it as social consciousness. And so, you know, we can all kind of define or create terms that feel right for ourselves and for the organizations we work with. But what this was really reminding me of was that, you know, in the public conversation, words like sustainability, green, eco are still really dominant. And so, in our efforts to try to be more precise and to push the conversation forward, I just wonder if we may be limiting the reach of our message or missing the opportunity to reach a more mainstream audience by refusing to use words that have higher search and conversation volume. And so it was just, kind of an interesting tension point for me. And I think one that I'll continue to wrestle with. It's almost like, how can you make sure your message is discoverable and easily understandable by like the average online consumer, but also make sure that you're being, precise with your language.
And especially if it resonates and aligns with what your company or organization, university, research institute, or nonprofit is doing. I think it's a matter also of education with some of these words. It's the meaning of some of these words is sometimes almost as mysterious as that of sustainability in this case. So maybe it's a matter of how much information there is and how present it is in folks' mind, like when they look at this. Yet another angle, sorry, I should shake things up like in so many different directions, but that is the approach that we decided to take to kind of attack this big, very complex topic. These are the media outlets that have the most links shared within this period, of course, that we looked at relating to sustainability. So you see some familiar names here. The Guardian, of course, Reuters, you see the New York Times, Forbes, BBC at the bottom, World Economic Forum, but there are also some surprises. Luke's magazine, cannot say I was familiar with it before. So we looked into why this site here, this publication here was showing up so high in this media outlet. And the reason is this post here, which is, apparently something that's eminently pinnable. Because we saw a lot of these pictures show up on Pinterest quite a bit. Those were of course tied with the copy and the text, which referred to ethical fall fashion collections, and surely had a lot of mentions of sustainability. Whereas something like Reuters, for instance, over in one of the top articles from Reuters, looked at sustainable from a different point of view. This was related to COVID and protests. That is, not necessarily how we're thinking about it throughout this webinar, but then again, it's an interesting way of using it. It was saying these measures would not be sustainable over the long term, again, referring to some of the original meaning of the word. At the same time, these are still part of the sustainability conversation, so that still means something. We are going to move in after this panoramic view across many different angles through which we can attack this topic. We're going to move a little bit into the more individual perspective. We're going to use search data. We're going to use audience segmentation to try and understand what are some of the motivators behind individual choices around sustainability. And I think I'm going to leave Oryelle to present this part here, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. So exactly as Debbie mentioned, the focus on this next section is to move away from the macro and understand things like motivations and behaviors from the individual perspective, from the community perspective, and also how kind of brands and corporations are marketing themselves and how they're communicating with their consumers within the space. So when we look at search data, for example, we can see that sustainability is really connected to, first of all, clarity. As we've mentioned a couple of times already, sustainability is such a broad, all-encompassing concept that we've all, I think, involved ourselves with and engaged with without actually, I can only speak for myself, thinking critically about what it means for us and what it means for our day-to-day lives. So we can see here on the far left-hand side, sustainability is correctly defined, is best described, asking for further clarification and further education about the concept. We can also see some action-orientated searches, which very much connects to the previous slide around solutions and how to solve the problem of sustainability within one's own life as a person, as an individual. So again, sustainability for dummies for business, for small businesses, for kids, for beginners? Like, how can we actually like edit our behaviors to become more sustainable and engage with this meta-narrative? And then lastly, and this one I thought was particularly interesting, was on the far right-hand side, sustainability without equity, sustainability without limits, compromising future generations. Now, to me, this does not sound like a consumer. This doesn't even really necessarily maybe sound like a business. This sounds like practitioners or academics, people who think about sustainability perhaps in a more overreaching, a broader way. And I think this slide really helps distinguish exactly what Jessica mentioned earlier about how different practitioner or those of us who are involved in sustainability in an everyday sense, how different that conversation is compared to the individual or the consumer. Next slide, thank you. So when we look at these individual motivations, again, this is coming from both how individual people respond to sustainability, how they talk about it, but also how corporations and products are like marketed towards those people. And we can really see, thankfully, hopefully, that optimism that we were seeing prior in this presentation. We can see that hope is really resonating here. People are hoping that their efforts are good enough. They hope that that product will be successful. In several cases, in the case of alternate meats, for example, they're hoping that it will be so successful that to break the mainstream and perhaps replace less sustainable services and products. When we compare that to something like guilt, which is certainly something that I've seen in certain marketing, particularly when looking at kind of age differences and how different demographics respond to sustainability, I'm really quite pleased that guilt is so actually low down in this motivation. It sort of suggests that people aren't connecting to sustainability because they feel like they have to in a kind of guilt way. They are responding, in fact, because they believe it's their duty, because they think they have a responsibility, because they're happy to, because they're enjoying connection to like self-worth, or in the case of habit, it connects to this idea that they just establish sustainable practices within one's own life and build it up from within. So we have some examples here. For self-worth, I feel good when I wear anything from my wardrobe knowing it's made a positive impact on the environment. And when we look at creativity, it brings us joy to see an increased number of people fighting for a brighter, cleaner, sustainable Zimbabwe. So again, it's no longer a narrative of, oh, you should and you're a terrible person if you don't, but rather it's enriching to that person or to that consumer. Next slide, please.
If I could add on, Oryelle, there's the data definitely tracks with the number of studies that that were conducted, that we reviewed as part of our behavior change research. And, I think what's really interesting to note is that particularly a lot of the nonprofit groups have traditionally, and also a lot of kind of the newer activists are still relying on these guilt messages. And I think one huge opportunity for sustainability communicators and marketers is to start creating new narratives. And, there's very little in the public imagination about what life could look like if we get it right. There's a lot of narratives of what will happen if we get it wrong. But just to kind of, envision, okay, if we were to really all as a society prioritize sustainability, would that result in deeper connections with one another? Would that mean a closer kind of affiliation with nature in a way that promotes mental health? Like there's so much I think that could be done to really use hope and self-worth and some of these dimensions to really get people on board with being part of the solution. And so it's nice to see the data reinforce that.
Thank you so much. And also just to jump on that point, I appreciate, I'll keep this short. I've recently done a Twitter-centric project for a client which looked at how people connect to climate change. So not sustainability as a term, but obviously an important sector, an important part of it. And we found that the number of people resonating and corresponding with apocalypse messaging is going down. People are getting basically fatigued with this idea that the world is going to end, particularly after the pandemic. There is so much more focus on wellness and trying to be appreciative of what you have and control what you can. And that messaging really was correlated in what we were seeing in that search in related to climate change. And again, here when talking about sustainability as well, which is very exciting. If you go on to the next slide, please. Now we're looking at behaviors within the sustainability conversation. And again, this is something that I found particularly interesting because we can see here that ethical consumption, reducing waste, growing your own food, these are all kind of the top performing behaviors within the search. And this is particularly interesting because they're all kind of connected to how people purchase things. They're all connected to how people buy. Growing your own food is a rejection of buying food from a supermarket or buying food that is not locally sourced. Ethical consumption is actively how to buy things in a way that positively or neutrally impacts sustainability. There isn't much conversation when we look at the far right-hand side. Buying less is significantly smaller when it comes to like sort of overall volume data. And this is particularly interesting when Jessica and Davide and I were talking about this earlier, in that there was this sort of connection between, we are still talking brands, consumers, they're still talking to consumers. They still want their target base to buy their products, but now they're trying to do it in a way that connects to sustainability. And not only is there something that is conflicting in the messaging, as we I'm sure all aware of this idea of like rejecting fast fashion or only buying the food that one has available to you, but also it can lead to this idea of greenwashing. Again, this idea that you're pushing out messages that says that you should be sustainable, but also one, the very own business model is about purchasing more product and beyond, what actually is necessary. So that's another particular.
Capitalism's grip is really clear here.
Yeah, exactly. Going on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So when we pair these motivations onto these behaviors, one thing that we find is something like habit. So this is the doing something out of because you've always done it, you've built it into your daily life, perhaps the businesses, you've built it as part of various sectors of their corporations. And we can see that this is has pretty equal relationship to ethical consumption as it does thrift shopping. So again, that really enforces the narrative of whilst people are still talking about sustainability, they're talking as if they could buy sustainability. It's something that they actually try and reach for or achieve outwardly. It's slightly smaller in connection to reducing waste, although, it's not tiny. And then again, growing own food is smaller still. When we compare that to self-worth, on the other hand, which is the idea of connecting joy to sustainability, pride, being sort of celebratory of one's behaviors, this again really connects to ethical consumption. But this one, it comes actually down to reducing waste and less so of thrift shopping. So this kind of joy that one experiences when interacting with sustainable behaviors is more connected to the daily purchase of I've bought this thing and it is sustainable and I've done well, and then I've disposed of it in a minimal fashion. So it's again this really interesting idea of how different motivations can connect to different behaviors and turn how practitioners or brands can talk to their target audiences. Speaking of audiences, when we look at these habits and behaviors, obviously you're talking about this huge community of people. It's this global search of people talking about sustainability in this very kind of fuzzy way. So what we did was we did advanced network analysis of the people involved in that conversation, and this is segmented relatively broadly speaking, so it has some connection to academia. We have some global BTS stands. That one spike that we saw earlier in the presentation really did have an impact on the conversation. We are seeing tech be present here. So this is a kind of demographic understanding of who is involved in the conversation. But one thing that we can do at Pulsar, which is particularly exciting, is we can segment specific behaviors or specific things that we're particularly interested in through filtering. So in this instance, we looked at those using buying terms or purchasing behaviors within that sustainability search. I think this is very specifically within the US. And what we are able to see is, yes, we still have that tech and finance business people. I think this is connected to buying sustainable stocks and shares. We see Tesla, which obviously we've mentioned previously, the connection there. Fashionistas, perhaps again, unsurprisingly. And we also have some interesting niche audiences, like environmentalists are, relatively speaking, the same kind of size as MSNBC progressives. And we've also got some sort of aesthetics, fairycore and witchy. So it really does highlight, when it comes to targeting communities, that sustainability is a wide-reaching blanket conversation that's happening. When we look at these fashionistas very particularly, because my expertise is predominantly in the fashion space, we can see that when we look at the behaviors exhibited, they talk about, again, ethical consumption, thrift shopping. They are interested in buying sustainable practices. They are not engaging necessarily with buying less. Now, this could be due to the fact that we, as brands and as consumers, are not talking to them about buying less. There are very few brand campaigns that focus on buying higher quality products and then having minimal repeat purchases. So again, this is something that really is resonating throughout the rest of the report.
Thank you so much, Oryelle. The kind of segmentation that we do here is just a small taste of what we can do and what we do every day. Again, as I say, different people talk about the same topic differently. So any of the charts that you've seen before, whether it's problem solution or whether it's behaviors or whether it's greenwashing, all those certainly are very different in each community. Each community has a different approach and different priorities and different behaviors that emerge through this kind of seamless listening and audience segmentation kind of study, which allows you to drill down into some of the specific language, into some of the specific influencers, and really useful for marketers and for folks in the nonprofit world as well to kind of target campaigns. So we're going to close this off with a short dive into some of the industries, brands, and retailers in this conversation. So we looked at the industry breakdown overall. This had a couple of surprises for me, at least. These are the industries that are most talked about clearly in the overall sustainability conversation over the past 6 months. We see food coming up top. We have finance, which I was surprised for it to be so present in this conversation, whereas energy, technology, fashion, travel and tourism, of course, took a hit probably because of restrictions and everything. Otherwise, it probably would have indexed higher, and some smaller ones like pharma, mining, professional services. Here we looked specifically at the retail conversation, kind of the similar approach that we did for the top media outlets before. We just looked at the top links in this conversation that were coming from retailers. And here we see that, we have many familiar names here, many other less familiar names, smaller sites, but we do have, for instance, Etsy here, which takes home a good chunk of the share of voice. So for instance, one of the top engaged posts was this one, again on Pinterest, that is very popular for clearly talking about products and talking about the sustainability of these products. For instance, in here, we're talking about recycled metals and a sustainability commitment around gemstones and repurposing for future redesign products. So this was one of the top posts that came through linking to Etsy, which came on Pinterest. Also on Pinterest, this post here, which was one of the best performing posts for IKEA.com. This post here specifically looked at this product here and talked about, again, on Pinterest, sustainability and environment in general as a company policy, in some way specific to this product. That is by 2030, we want all materials in our products to be recycled or renewable and sourced in responsible ways. So this means that retailers and product copy like travel far and wide. Product copy is something that really is a good chunk of this conversation, and it kind of informs also how people read it and how people are affected by it. Going back to the industries there, we started to look at like how each of these industries is perceived with that lens that we had early on in the presentation about problem solution. And here we start to see some interesting findings. We have the food industry, for instance, which is perceived as slightly more of a problem than a solution, or at least language that is associated with the food industry overall is recalling more the problem than a solution, whereas something like technology, for instance, is still perceived over indexes as more of a solution. This ties into broader conversations that you might have heard under the umbrella term of techno-optimism, or maybe it's a lack of hope, right? That those legacy industries, older industries, might be able to change their supply chains, change their practices, and technology is something newer and shinier where there's a little bit more of a frontier and a little bit more of an open canvas for that. Zooming in a little bit on this industry conversation, but taking a slightly different approach, we looked at associations with sustainable. So sustainable, of course, development is very, very high there, partly because of sustainable development goals. But then we start to see some of those topics that are really industry specific, or at least relate to those industries, like sustainable living, sustainable agriculture, energy, of course, packaging, finance, tourism, and less ideas like sustainable city, sustainable technology. Those have not quite caught on as much as categories, or really as topics themselves. This is a subtopic within the broader topic of sustainability. Moving on, and I think this is one of our last slides here, we looked at companies and brands. So we compared large food multinational groups with new food brands in terms of like how words relating to sustainable packaging, or to reducing zero waste, or to fair trade or transparent information connected with those brands. So for instance, if we want to take Nestle here, this color here maps to fair trade and supply chain. This was one of the most engaged with posts. I really like this approach about how sustainability is not just about materials, but about methods. Whereas for the newer food brands, which of course like have very different emphasis on different topics, partly also because of their marketing and of the messages that they're putting out there as a brand. For instance, in this case, it was a news source that was talking about plant-based meat, and the fact that, countering, I suppose, the narrative, saying that plant-based meat might be actually harmful for some parts of the environment. So we looked at those brands. They're, of course, very different companies and very different industries, but it starts to map out some of the work that we do with some of our clients who work with us to kind of devise dimensions that matter to their business, that are industry or brand specific, and are tied to the initiatives that they do in order to understand how people are talking about those dimensions. And that is going to be it in terms of slides. Thank you all for your patience. That was a lot of slides that we had to go through relatively quickly, and each of them could have benefited from 10 minutes or more of explanation. But of course, we invite any of you to connect with us if you're further interested in a conversation or learning a little bit more. Reconsidered.co is a site for Jessica's online community and consultancies. Pulsar platform is the website for us. You're welcome to follow us on Twitter, of course. Keep in touch. It's always nice to give a connective element to some of these digital events, which are a little bit less interactive sometimes than the in-person events. And speaking of less interactive, I think I've ignored plenty of questions and hands raised and Q&A. So I think I'm going to move on to those, but I'll let maybe Jessica, if you'd like to kind of finish off this presentation, maybe with some initial thoughts that we can start talking about as the questions come in. I see we have if they keep coming in, we'll end up very, very late because we have 12 already. But yeah. I'll leave it to you to kind of kick this off maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I think reviewing the data was really fascinating as it really, challenged a lot of assumptions that we might have about, what words are used, how they're used, key moments and the like. And I think, one takeaway for me was that, first, that the word sustainability is not going away anytime soon. And people have been having challenges with this word for as long as I've been in the space. In fact, back in 2010, Ad Age put out they have like a jargoniest jargon list, and sustainability topped it even back in 2010. So this is by no means a new conversation, but I think what's interesting with this new round of data is understanding indeed that different audiences understand these terms in very different ways. And so if there's one takeaway, when thinking about communicating about sustainability and using that word or those adjacent to it is truly to know your audience, and to, kind of consider their interpretations and their kind of fluency in this type of conversation when deciding what words to use. And the second, and this is, definitely something that's starting to become more important, especially as regulations are coming into play around how to communicate about sustainability. Some of you may be based in the UK and be familiar with the new Green Claims Code that was released very, very recently. There's also been a lot of momentum around consumer agencies in Norway and the Netherlands, where I'm based, and I'm sure the US is sure to follow. But there's a lot more kind of scrutiny about how companies are using claims like sustainable, green, eco. And it's no longer okay to just kind of brand something sustainable and then not share why. And so I guess my second takeaway is that, okay, if these are words that are here to stay and they are the way to make your work discoverable by a larger swath of people, then, just being sure to pair those words with a very clear description of why what you're referencing is sustainable. And, it's, I think, the difference between sustainability branding and transparency, which is what a lot of consumers have indicated in study after study, is what they're looking for, is transparency in order to build trust. So, no more shortcuts. Let's take on the challenge of trying to communicate about really complicated, thorny things in a way that's going to be accessible to people. But I think, we're coming to a point where it's no longer acceptable to just, kind of greenwash or be simplified in the way we use language.
It's about time, I would say. Yeah. There are many, many questions. I need to prioritize here a little bit. Some of those that might have been addressed already, I will leave. But first question is around slides and recordings. We will send you the full report. It's probably going to be early next year at some point. We need to still add a few slides and a few charts, but you will get this in your inbox if you've signed up for this, of course. In terms of recording, we'll let you know as soon as there's something up, whether it's an edited version or whether it's the full recording. We had one question that is directly for you, Oryelle. How come reducing travel is so low for behavior changes? Do you know why? Do you have any guesses around why travel index is so low in that chart?
Yeah, so looking within the data of that chart, I honestly think it's because we are looking at kind of more recent conversations where travel has been incredibly limited anyway. I feel like it's a very natural response that we kind of only really care about the things that are right in front of us. So when it comes to reducing travel or traveling in a sustainable way, because most of us haven't been able to at all indulge in any kind of travel, and in fact it's against a lot of like governmental guidelines across various countries to reduce travel outside of the sustainability reasons and spaces. I honestly think that is why it's much lower in this conversation. So I think as hopefully, fingers crossed, things improve on the global stage regarding COVID-19, we'll be able to see conversation around travel increase because people start doing it again, essentially.
Yeah. Thank you, Oryelle. And there was another conversation around food. Is there much conversation about food, for instance, moving towards sustainable diets, reducing meat, dairy, alternatives to protein? If so, it is growing. I think that was partly answered in some of the later slides. It is a very big chunk of the industry talk. It's also something that we've studied, in other Pulsar studies, whether it's alternative meat or it's alternative milks. It is definitely growing quite a bit. There's another question around how we calculate the audience map. So the audiences that we show are part of, it's one of our features that allows you to one-click segment whoever's participating in that conversation. It is based off of Twitter data. And then there's all sorts of network analysis behind it to create that map based on many different profile characteristics that kind of group folks into similar groups. So for instance, like people who have similar influencers or people who tend to gravitate towards the same corners of Twitter. So hopefully that answered that. There's a question about Patagonia. Why is it missing from the retailer slide? In my organization, we always look at them specifically as leaders in sustainability comms. Of course, they have been pioneers. The reason I think why they were missing there is probably because simply a question of the time that we looked at, the period that we looked at. Other retailers were indexing. Sometimes people will go straight to patagonia.com and not really share a link to a product. That was like more of a product indexing that we were trying to do. And so, I would assume when Patagonia launches a new product, a lot of people are probably, that is particularly like resonant with folks. That's when we'll see some of that. Sorry. Jessica,
I'm happy to jump in on that too, because actually just recently there was an article published on why Patagonia doesn't use the word sustainable. This is an article from just a couple of weeks ago, and they were specifically let me go down to the exact quote. They said that at Patagonia we don't use the word sustainable. Why? Because we recognize we are part of the problem. And this is actually kind of this acknowledgement, this almost like public like admission that we are part of the problem is gaining quite a lot of traction among some of the more progressive companies who are seeking to position themselves in this space. So Ace and Tate, an eyeglass retailer based here in the Netherlands, Gani, a Danish fashion brand that's also become quite in vogue among the Gen Z set, are kind of coming out with these messages. Hey, we are not sustainable, and here's why: because we recognize that being part of this industry, we are part of the problem, but we're trying to do better. So it's definitely I hesitate to call it a trend, but it is a bit of a trend. This kind of like backlash against sustainability branding to be like, nope, we're not sustainable, but let us tell you everything we're trying to do to mitigate our impact.
And Patagonia is definitely a leader. So
Patagonia with their "do not buy this jacket," like they've been a leader in kind of pushing the envelope in that way as well.
So certainly there will be a lot of followers to that. There's another question around the solution. Were you able to quantify that largely solution-based conversation between genuinely helpful and greenwashing? That's a very good question. We did not do that in this presentation. It would be easy to do. You're welcome to email me to continue that conversation. We can look at this data set specifically if you think there could be a way to split those into. There certainly is. We could find it together. It's very often a matter of filters. Somebody else, thank you so much for sharing this information. I noticed a couple of social media posts featured targeted green capitalisms. Are there any insights as to how the corporate sphere is responding to this critique? We did not analyze any of that, but it is an extremely interesting question. We had a whole part of this research that we didn't share with you today, which focused a little bit more on green capitalism and some of those conversations gravitating around that. I'm sure there is some corporate response in there, if not from the corporate accounts, like possibly by people who work in these companies who want to engage with that concept. So that would definitely be a very interesting direction in which to take this. Joe Morley is asking, where's the conversation going? Buzzwords for the future. Again, I would tie it back to like some of these concepts that we just talked about, like such as green capitalism, of course, like maybe anti-sustainability, like as Jessica was saying, like Patagonia is opening like new communication ideas. So certainly that's one to keep an eye out for. There was eco-anxiety is definitely one that we saw. We didn't include in this presentation, or techno-optimism, which we mentioned very, very briefly. Those are big growing categories that folks will be gravitating towards and when they talk about these topics. So these might be some cues like to go and dig around. There's a great comment by Jihan. I think the reason finance is one of the top in terms of the industries, one of the most represented industries, is because ESG, of course, and the pressure that investors and shareholders are putting on the FS is increasing by the day. For example, 84% of global investors have rebranded their asset under management to focus on ESG, environmental, social governance, from Forbes. Thank you very much. That is certainly true. I wondered in that case, like whether the greenwashing backlash, or at least like a quality filter to see if those are actually like implemented, or whether it's just a label and a stamp, might come back and engage with this topic. One question for Jessica. Working with consumer brands, how do you encourage them to actually adapt their business to meet our climate challenges versus just create fluffy messaging PR? That is a very good question.
Very good question. You know, my kind of thesis around this is the idea of communications as a catalyst. And, you know, this idea that once you start sharing messages with the world, then the world is then able to hold you accountable for those messages. And so I think it's very much a requires contributions from all parts of the system in order for this to work. So certainly it needs watchdogs, whether those are consumer organizations or activists or conscious consumers, to call companies out when they, you know, are sloppy with their messaging, or when they don't meet the goals that they've set for themselves. But, you know, I have seen over the course of my career the power of making commitments public. And my hope is that, you know, on net, by helping companies communicate about the work that they're doing, and by helping them think a little bit bigger about the targets that they're setting and making public, and by helping them create mechanisms for regular reporting and transparency, that ultimately drives action. I think if things are kept kind of internal, then, you know, it's easy enough to miss targets. Even, you know, on an individual level, that's true. So yeah, that's kind of the approach that we take at Reconsidered. Is thinking about the communications as a piece of the change effort, but not the only component. And I think the other piece of it is also just getting the right people involved in that process. We like to say that the process is as important as the product. And so something like a sustainability report, for example, yeah, that could be farmed out and an external company can do that, no problem. But where reporting gets really interesting is when you use the report as a mechanism for convening people within the company and outside the company to have deep and bold conversations about what the company stands for and where it's going. So I think that's just a secondary component that we try to bring to our work, is thinking about, how communications can really be used as a starting point for conversation.
Also an internal conversation, right? Almost like looking not just outwards to spread a message, but inwards to kind of understand how that message is felt and communicated through the company. We have a few last questions. Jeremy Harris asked a very interesting question about rural America. In rural America, some within agriculture refuse to use the word sustainability, I assume. They translate it as liberalism. How can we reach across political divides in making progress? That's a big question. Oryelle, not to put you on the spot to answer this complex. What I can say is that we are seeing, whenever we look at a topic, whenever we look at an audience, there's polarization is really at very, very high levels, especially in the US. Everybody sees that in their daily lives. We see that at the network level whenever we analyze these audiences and these conversations. What can help sometimes is finding bridge individuals or accounts that can kind of like speak to both sides. Those kind of audience maps that we showed kind of help you understand where those bridges exist between different communities, and maybe zoom in some of that language that resonates maybe with one group and also with another. But Oryelle, I know also some of the network work that we've done also with Twitter is related to finding those bridges. Is there anything you wanted to add on that complex question?
Yeah, well, the main, I think two points. First of all, I do believe that whilst we are moving into a stage of all encapsulating sustainability conversations, right? So like every element of a brand or a company, sustainability should be kind of considered and assessed in order to have consistent messaging. That being said, if you or your company or your brand is in an environment which that is more challenging, then doing something is better than nothing, like doing small steps and taking your audiences with you and like educating them alongside you, I think is appropriate. However, I do also want to highlight how, because of this kind of overarching sustainability conversation, as we've demonstrated here today, it isn't just about recycling. It isn't just about even necessarily believing that climate change is real. There's also economical considerations and treating workers fairly and connecting to sustainability on an individual level and an economical level. So perhaps there is some opportunities there to connect to sustainability conversations and sustainable practices in spaces that are already accepted across different political sectors. So, for example, economy versus and like wages and supporting people and workers for one group, and then highlighting environmental impact on another group, for example.
Yeah, it's its own study, right? If we wanted to look at this from that lens. One last question is regarding data. The trend lines that you saw at the beginning, those are mostly Twitter and Google search data. For the most part, throughout the study, we used all sorts of data sources, Twitter, Reddit, Pinterest, TikTok, Facebook, news, blogs, forums, every single data source that is available to us. With the audience segmentations, those are based off of Twitter data. I think we went through all the questions or almost all the questions. I apologize if I missed some of those. Again, you're welcome to email me, davide.beretta@Pulsar platform, or just reach out to any of us to continue this conversation. We went well over, we're at 1 hour 15. I think it's time to wrap this up. I would like to thank first the two researchers who have contributed to this report, Alexander Bryson and Dai Li. who worked very, very closely with me and made this research happen. Thank you so much for all your hard work, even in a very, very, very busy period. And then I want to thank you, Jessica, so much for joining us and lending us your expertise and your ideas. Also in helping interrogate this data and coming up with some of the questions that we answered in this report. It's been a joy to listen and broaden our thinking with somebody who has so much experience within this community.
It's been a real pleasure, and yeah, really excited to see how this conversation continues to grow.
Yes, and thank you so much, of course, Oryelle, for lending us your expertise and your ideas. Again, thank you all for tuning in. Please, again, reach out, visit pulsar.platform.com if you want to learn more. And I wish you a good evening, day, night, based on wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining. Bye-bye.